Thanks for joining us today. My name is Joan Maimi. I'm the project lead for the collaboration that we're having with Google on the Hangouts Meet buying journey experience. On behalf of Brown Feather, I would like to welcome you to this presentation. I would like to first introduce a bit our methodology at Brown Feather. It's called Design for Happiness. And Design for Happiness combines design thinking with emotion-driven design techniques that focus on emotional dilemmas as a starting point for innovation. And we combine those with a high-speed and rapid evolving process. So I would like to introduce first the profile map that we have, this output here, which talks about the different participants that we talked to for this project, what are the different segments, also what are the nuances between them, and also what are the different locations and the phases that we had in this project. Now, the first thing that I would like to highlight is the people that we talked to. We talked to 3 different segments. We talked to G Suite Hangouts Meet hardware participants who actually are G Suite participants or G Suite users and use Hangouts Meet hardware as their primary hardware solution or BC solution. We also talked to G Suite non-Hangouts Meet hardware, which actually also they are G Suite users, but they don't use Hangouts Meet as their primary solution, BC solution. And then we also have non-G Suite, who are the ones that mostly Microsoft users, who have other solutions like Polycom, BlueJeans, Cisco, and so. And interestingly enough, we also wanted to talk to other participants in that sense where BC experts from Google, but also resellers. Because what we found out during the research is we wanted to see both sides of the coin. We were getting a lot of information from those participants who are decision makers and end users, but we're missing the part of the resellers. So we went ahead and talked to a few participants there. We talked to Promibo and SADA Systems here in the US, but also we talked to Precis reseller, G Suite reseller in the Netherlands. Now, the segmentation went this way. We talked to 9 G Suite Hangouts Meet hardware users, 6 G Suite non-Hangouts Meet, 6 non-G Suite, and 6 other, which was this mix of participants. So we spent around 49 hours of immersions, and immersions are in-depth interviews that we do in the context of users or participants. And there we actually understand how is this buying journey process. And when we say buying, it's a bit more holistic. It's not actually in the process of buying, but we also wanted to see the moment they desire a new solution, they start going and finding it, then they buy. But we also want to explore the other part, which is, well, they had to deploy that solution, they had to onboard users, users had to start using it, and they had to evaluate how the solution was adopted by the company. Within the different profiles, we also talked to different company sizes. We talked to enterprises, but also small and medium businesses. And we saw a bit of differences in those two, and we actually made a classification or a categorization of those, and Ninka will explain you more in the stakeholder map. Now, we also had a good variety of vendors. We had from Zoom, Cisco, BlueJeans, Polycom. So also that gave us a really holistic picture of how actually the CIS companies behave or go about the journey. And this happened in 2 different countries or continents. So we first have a first session that we had in Europe, and we went into France, we went to London, the UK, we also did some immersions in Norway, in the Netherlands, and we also did a second phase where we talked to companies that are based here in the US. So all this process was done in 11 weeks, and here at the bottom you have an overview of what actually these phases were and how long it took us for each phase. And we want to keep this a very fast and agile process, so we make sure we don't lose the quality of the insights when we talk to participants. So we started with 4 weeks where we did planning and recruitment. And recruitment was really key because we wanted to make sure we were recruiting the right participants and the right companies for the research, so we could meet them in the context. And also in this phase in the planning, we also did a session in Stockholm with the key stakeholders from Google to make sure we're also capturing the findings that they had from previous research so we can build upon that knowledge. Then the second phase was sensitization, and here is a key aspect of our methodology of Design for Happiness, where we send personal journals to participants to make sure that, 1, we can recruit the right participants, but also we can brief them there with the topic at hand. And 3, we can also start drawing first hypotheses of the research. After the analysis of the personal journals, we draw first hypotheses that we share with the Google key stakeholders to start having some thoughts and ideas about what are the main dilemmas and concerns that these different target groups are having, and what are the differences between them. So the next phase in the Design for Happiness process was pre-immersions. And pre-immersions are those immersions that we conduct before the second phase of immersions. And these help us to draw the first hypotheses and confirm those ones that we got from the journals to make sure that we're going in the right direction, then we can fine-tune that later on. We share the main findings from the pre-immersions also with key stakeholders from Google to start thinking about what are the main insights that we're getting, so we can go in the second phase, we can refine those and find those that were not uncovered. So a key aspect when we go into these immersions with participants is that they are in-context sessions. So in there, we can really observe the participant in the natural context, and we can also try to uncover what are the workarounds they're using to solve certain pain points they're experiencing. So it was really interesting to see in these different companies how they actually set up their video conferencing systems and what were the struggles that they had and also the bliss points and how did they actually go about it. During those sessions, we also use the emotion capture cards, and that's a tool that we use internally that help us very much to capture what were the emotions that they felt at those particular activities in the journey. And from that, draw what are actually the concerns that they had and start mapping the relationship between them so we can actually uncover the emotional dilemmas. So the next phase in the process was ideation. And the Ramfeather team, we spent 2 weeks analyzing that data that we got from the immersions, and that helped us to start shaping the outputs. And that phase ended up with a midterm co-creation session where we invited different stakeholders from Google to present them the work in progress outputs so we could actually build upon their knowledge and make sure we're capturing the right insights for the final presentation. This session was held here in San Diego in the Ramfeather office, and it was a whole day session where we interacted a lot with the different stakeholders and put post-its on the different outputs so we can actually shape it to the shape that you see today. As to say again, this was an 11 weeks process. It was very intense, but we had a really good engagement from the Google people, so that was, we appreciate very much because that really fostered this collaborationship and relationship between both companies. So next we would like to share with you a short movie about the participants that we met that actually tells the story of what is this mindset that decisions makers have and what is the dilemma that they're facing.
We still have that perception in London as well, even though we're trying to be more in tune with the business. We don't want to be the people that are just, seem to say no to things, which is the historical view of technology, right? We want to be delivering solutions and value to the business, understanding what the business wants. So just being able to be in those conversations where we're getting the requirements is great, but then to actually deliver something is even better. So we feel very proud to be able to deliver that, and it's nice to feel a part of the business as well, not just a cost center, which sometimes technology gets viewed as well historically. I
think sometimes we're on a quest to elevate the experience, and I think people, our clients, take pride in their partnership with us when they too feel like they're with a progressive, innovative firm who's forward-thinking, forward-moving, and that's what we're trying to do. We don't want them to just view us as, the experience will be the same as another return. The experience is different, and it's going to continue to evolve and get better.
I feel like older people, they really like some particular brands because they've seen so much of the world that they now feel like, one brand is better than the other. But we millennials probably like the more evolving and the more newer technologically advanced companies, which probably the older people dislike. So it was a difference in opinions, a considerable difference in experience between the two, and they are ultimately the ones who are paying for it. So we call them dinosaurs in the company. So it was difficult to convince the dinosaurs, basically.
Last October, I was with our CIO in Mountain View with Google, and they also showed us the dashboard of POM, of our domain. And it was Gmail was completely on top, and video was there, and chat was low, and Drive was 50% of the people uses it. Yeah, that really freaked me out. Is it that bad? So that's where we believe we have our journey to move forward. Yeah. And then you talk about change management again, and then you need to do storytelling and be the example. Take people into this future, show them, make them feel confident about this change.
And at first, I would get a dozen or so emails in response to that saying, why are we changing? I don't like change. I don't have time to change. This is terrible. I love blue jeans. And the people that gave me those all caps emails, very angry, italicized sometimes, which I knew I was in trouble because they were in italics. Those are the ones that I won over the quickest. They would come to the training or something, and they're very frustrated with their arms crossed, and I'm not gonna use this. I'm gonna use blue jeans until you kick me off of it. My biggest fear was winning over the users, but it totally worked out. I get very few complaints about Zoom, so fingers crossed. Stays that way.
So as we've seen in the video, there's decision makers have an evolving mindset, is actually changing. And what we uncovered there was a bigger dilemma, an overarching dilemma. And dilemma are opposing concerns. And the importance of dilemmas is not only addressing one side of the concerns, but making sure that we address both sides so we actually satisfy the dilemma, and that's a really good starting point for innovation. So with that, we can create first sheer bliss, but also we can drive loyalty. So the main dilemma that we uncover for decision makers is adapt versus adopt. And decision makers want to find technical solutions that address the company's evolving needs, but at the same time, they want to make sure that that is not at the expense of the company's rituals, but also colleagues' rituals and culture. So they are confronting that with a dilemma. And as we've seen in the video, Matt is telling us that he doesn't want to be seen as the guy, the IT guy that says no. And actually, Matt comes from a financial research company, and he wants to make sure that whatever he's doing is also having impact in the business. So he's very much aligned with the values of the company. So that's a really interesting dilemma that we should focus on. Now, the second part of these dilemmas that it's actually touching upon end users is this need for end users to having new ways of collaborating and at the same time making sure they boost their productivity. In new ways of collaboration, that means is I have so many things to do. I have so many things to accomplish because my day-to-day is getting more and more busy, and with new technologies, I need to keep up. There's so much things to do and so little time. So they're always looking new ways to actually do that and make sure they can get the job done. But at the same time, they need to make sure that by using these new tools or new ways of doing work, they actually are being productive and they're being most effective in doing that. So we've seen that, as Thomas was telling us, well, at Verizon, they just adopted G Suite as the main platform. But still people stick to the old rituals of using WebEx to set their video conferencing. And that also creates a burden because even the tools that they have available right now with G Suite are great. They could start using Hangouts Meet, which is much more intuitive to them. People stick to the old rituals and use WebEx because it's still more comfortable to them, and they see yet no value in using a different platform. Another example is James. James is a project manager at a financial tech company, which is actually based in Australia, but also have different offices around the world, here in San Francisco, but also in the UK. This company is actually a G Suite Hangouts Meet company. And James was telling to us that he uses Slack as their main video conferencing system while they are already there, because he doesn't see the benefit of changing to Hangouts Meet if he's already in Slack. He prefers to do that video conferencing through Slack instead of changing to Hangouts Meet, because at that moment, he's already there, he doesn't see the value of changing, there's nothing extra, which proves the point of they want to also make sure that if they use new tools, that's actually boosting their productivity. So let's take these two dilemmas that we uncovered for decision makers and end users as a starting point to understand how do they actually go about the buying journey. And here, interestingly enough, what we found is that there's a nuance also in the type of company. And Ninka now will explain you more about it.
Hi, I'm Nienke and I am one of the researchers in the Google project. So as Johan already mentioned, the buying journey of a decision maker cannot be taken in isolation. To be able to see it holistically, we need to understand their mindset, where they're coming from. The two most important mindsets that we saw was established and new generation. The established companies have as a collaboration mindset that I want to play safe by relying on what is tried and tested, so achieve efficient collaboration and cost reduction. So as Matt was saying, video conferencing is mainly a top-down decision, and it is basically made to reduce the travel costs. While for new generations, the collaboration mindset is completely different. They want to be agile, so they can stay on top of the game and facilitate effective collaboration to achieve productivity and the employee happiness. So that is a completely different mindset. As Ayan said, who's from Deliveroo, one of the fastest growing companies in Europe, he's saying that it was really important to have a video conferencing system because they wanted to enable the collaboration. They need to be evolving and they need to adapt to those needs. This mindset really determines what they're looking for in a VC vendor. As an established company like Hetov was from a financial company, non-G Suite. He's really looking for a vendor that is video conferencing as the art of the company, as the center. So he says G Suite was never in the consideration. I wanted a company that has really got video conferencing. They wouldn't stop right away, and they have excellent audio and video quality. So it's more of the tried and tested methods. While the new generation, they don't want a video conferencing as the art of the company. They want collaboration. And then Google is coming out really, really well. So Clement actually goes for Google for that, because he believes that Google is way closer to the way that we work than Microsoft, for example. So the companies of those two different mindsets, they can be recognized by different attributes. The established ones, they can be recognized by the hierarchical layers. They have several and strict hierarchical layers, while the new generations are more flat in their hierarchy. And it has some consequences on the rest of the attributes. For example, the pace of change. Established companies are quite slow in their change, while the new generations, they want to be evolving. They have a constant and rapid change that is going on. Another one is the difference of stakeholders. As for the established one, the management has a clear, high voice in the company. For the new generation, it's more of the power users, so it's more bottom-up that have the biggest voice. And you will see that that will change in the requirements as well. And the third one is the role of an IT team. What we've seen, and you've seen it in a movie as well, is that IT wants to be visionaries. And that's both for established and both for a new generation. The difference, however, is that the established companies, they have more strict roles, a more dedicated IT team. And if they want it or not, they're more of a support function right now than they would be in the new generations, where they can have the space to be the visionaries that they would like to be. And those attributes, those characteristics, they really determine the barriers for adoption. And for established company, they have a lot of current ecosystem of products already in place, and products need to fit with that. If it doesn't fit, and we'll see that later on, it's just not going to be adopted at all. So the second part for the established company is that there is a need for change management. And we saw that already in the dilemmas, that users are sometimes resistant, especially in big companies, for change. So you need to have parts in place that overcomes that barrier. And the two last barriers are the functional ones, but are not less important, which is the limited bandwidth and the security concerns. Those are barriers that need to be overcome to be able to penetrate this market for the established companies. The new generation barriers are a little bit different though. For example, as the user rituals are constantly evolving, as I said, there are a lot of change in there. The products need to change and adapt with that in that pace as well. Another barrier that we saw is that it's not scalable for the global market. Those companies quickly scale, and it's not always a dedicated IT team that's going into the deployment or into the buying journey. So it needs to be easy scalable for beyond IT. The third one is the lack of flexibility to customize amongst the meeting intents. So from video conferencing becomes more part of the culture, more part of their rituals. It also opens up new ways of meetings, and it needs to adapt to that. And at this moment, there's a lack of flexibility in that sense. And the last one, but not the least one, is that it's a tedious and time-consuming journey at this moment. And that brings me to the biggest part here. For the new generation, time is the currency. And If you go to the journey, everything needs to be seamless and everything needs to be smooth, because otherwise it will be seen as a barrier for adoption. While for the established companies, they're more traditional, and for them, the cost efficiency is the currency, as you already saw in the mindset. Besides the company cultures and the mindsets, there's also a difference in stakeholders that we see. You always have the 4 different most important ones that we saw was the IT, the management, the sales department, and the workforce. And each of them have their different specific requirements that needs to be answered. The IT is in this case the spider in the web that needs to answer all those spinning plates. But as I said already on the mindset, depending on the company culture that you have, the balance of these requirements of these stakeholders change. For the established companies, the management becomes the most important stakeholder, while for the new generation, the power user is. Before I go into the details of the differences between those mindsets, I would like to tell you about the indispensable requirements. Those are the requirements that need to be, are the baseline, the foundations that need to be answered before going into the more specific needs. One of the biggest indispensable requirements is being intuitive. And as it might seem like a really straightforward one for the workforce or for the management, it's also very important for the IT itself. As Felix already mentioned, who's part of a security company for governmental institutions, he said getting someone to read the documentation only happens with, for lack of a better word, shit hits the fan. So that means that it really needs to be intuitive, because otherwise it will be so much work in the maintenance later on. It's not worth the effort, so I'd rather choose another solution. Then of course, after the went through this change management, the people actually got it adopted, it still needs to be ease of use, which is one of the most obvious ones. And the third one, and also an obvious one, but really good to highlight, is the reliability. And I will touch upon that later as well, because if the reliability is not there, it's one of the biggest drivers to go for another solution. And the last one is integration with my rituals. And I'd like to highlight that a little bit from Lisette. Lisette is an adoption manager at Van der Lande in the Netherlands, who is one of the companies that are really established. I think they're already for 100 years in business. And what she's saying is the older people and the secretaries experience the biggest problems when they moved from Cisco to Skype for Business. And the reason for that was mainly for the secretaries, is that their needs are not taken into account right now. They're not the ones who are actually doing the meetings, what it's designed for, but they're the ones that are setting up the meetings for the managers. That meant that moving from Cisco to Skype did not always make their situation better. And that is something that needs to be taken into account. You need to do a lot of change management to convince them to actually adopt it. So besides the indispensable requirements, we have some specific requirements, as I already said. I'd like to start with the IT AV, because besides the indispensable requirements, those are the ones that are the most important. And as you see in blue, those are the established, and the new generation are the purple. There is some difference between them, and I'll walk you through the most important ones. So first of all, and that has to do with the mindset, is that the established companies are looking for tried and tested solutions. And we've already seen that before. While the new generations are looking for new and evolving products. As Clement mentioned, we're not buying an end product from Google. We're buying a product that's changing over time, that will change with us. And that's what's important, besides the reasonable price, of course. So next to being tried and tested, the established companies have a need for integration of current systems. And I would like to emphasize that a little bit further, because as Felix mentioned, if it doesn't work with Okta, which is their single sign-on system, I'm not going to use it. No matter how good it is or how cheap it is, if it doesn't fit with my ecosystem, it's out. Besides that, the service is also really important for them. We've seen multiple companies, and especially financial companies, that have a need for 24 hours, 24/7 support. The reason that is important is because they cannot handle it alone. They cannot handle 300 rooms with 3 people alone. So they need to have that safety net that it will be fixed whenever, as quick as possible. One of the biggest differences between the established companies and the new generation companies for the IT is the way of deployment. As established companies would like to outsource the deployment to ensure the quality for them, for new generation, the scalability is more important. And as I mentioned already earlier, scalability beyond the IT department for deployment. A simple service desk need to be able to deployment, as Clement is saying. Besides the indispensable requirements and the requirements that come from the IT and the AV department, management and marketing have a big voice in this as well, and they have some specific requirements that need to be answered. However, it's not one of the easiest stakeholders to manage, because sometimes they even conflict within themselves. One day they can say, I want to have an easy rollout, I want to have a cheap solution that enables every employee that I have to work with video conferencing, to enhance this collaboration. And then the second day, when it's already deployed, they say, yeah, but for me, I would like to have a system that is more qualitative, that is more expensive, basically, as well. So that really conflicts with the ubiquitous system that they were looking for before. But this professional look and feel, despite this, is a really important requirement, as well for established as new generation. Because it's their business card, because that's how they face the world. Besides those, the sales department has some specific requirements as well. And especially in the new generation companies, portability becomes really important. As Chad is saying, who is a G Suite non-meet, he's saying that I want to be able to work wherever I want. So he's giving Facebook Portal as an example, that he says I can just take it in my suitcase, go on to my hotel, plug it in, and have the same quality as that I would expect from working in my office. The second part is excellent audio and video quality. And sure, that has to do with the reliability as well, but in this point, it needs to be excellent. Because if you're doing the sales, you need to be understanding the nuances of the face, of the gestures, and you cannot break up, because you can lose clients with that. As Roman was saying, the sales department is actually using Blue Jeans in our company, besides the regular G Suite Hangouts Meet that the rest of the company is using, because it was just not qualitative enough. And then the last important stakeholder is the workforce. And for them, it's important to have an ubiquitous system. So when they go from one company or one office to another one, they don't have to go through this whole changing rituals again. They can easily just start working and do what they're good at. And the last requirement for the workforce that's important is that it needs to be flexible. Because the workforce has evolving needs, they're going rapidly, especially for new generations. And those requirements change constantly. So you cannot have a static product that won't change for the 10 years because you will be outdated. So as flexibility is really important for the new generation, familiarity is the most important requirement for the workforce in established companies, which is a conflict in that sense. Because they would like to have a system that is staying for coming years and won't change, so it won't disrupt their rituals too much. They're less adaptable in that sense. So to wrap this up, we see a distinguished difference between established company cultures and a new generation mindset. And what we see is that you're really winning already in the new generation. You're answering those needs and those stakeholders that are most crucial in those company cultures. However, there is a clear opportunity to play in the established companies as well, because their needs and their requirements are currently not answered as they could be. So before we go into the journey, I would like you to take this as a mindset, as a lens that walk you through the journey and see this picture holistically. So we can see where Google can win and play beyond just new generation.
Different people have different requirements, and some people think Cisco is not a good brand and Microsoft is better. So it was a lot of juggling between different people's opinions. I think it was a very subjective process. It was not objective. If it was objective, it would have been so much clearer. right? But it was not. So that's why I thought it was like a very difficult process to get there.
The most challenging decision I had in these
discussions.
It was probably finding a solution that met all of their needs. Finding a solution that not just met their needs but also met the needs of, our CFO, who said we can't. This is your budget and you have to stick to it. So we had a lot of spinning plates at the time and we had to tick a lot of boxes. So probably that was the most difficult decision.
I was very anxious of presenting this as the single platform. I was saying, okay, well, we're going from BlueJeans to Hangouts. It's going to work and it's going to stay here for X number of years. I was not 100% sure about that because Google is known for pulling the plug on services and products. And this is something that made me anxious of like committing myself to it and telling internally, oh yeah, we're going to do this.
It's always a balance. We want to deliver on day one a really good experience, but we also don't want it falling apart. So under this desk, you've got a Chrome box that's just kind of attached with dual lock to the bottom of the table. For better or for worse, it is what it is. For all intents and purposes, it works. And there's just like a big service loop of cable under there that I hope just doesn't, fall down at some point.
Our sales reps are commissioned based off of margin. So for a G Suite deal, that can range anywhere between 50 to millions of dollars, and very interesting. What's not very interesting today to our sales reps is selling a large Hangouts Meet hardware deal, because at most you might get 120 rooms where you could actually get the license margin versus the actual hardware component of it, where they aren't making much, 2-3% of the overall deal value. So our reps are really focused on selling those high margin deals. I would want us to stay in our circle of what we do very well. And I think if we got into AV deployments and complex AV situations, it would bring us outside of that circle. And then I'd be afraid, because then we could mess up a project and it would have repercussions beyond just the Hangouts Meet hardware.
We have a G Suite managed service provider. They found out that we were looking at a new video conferencing solution, so they actually said, why don't you come to the Google headquarters, have a meeting, we'll bring in some remote people, we'll kind of demo Google Hangouts Meet for you. So we did exactly that. At the time, I didn't see it as like an enterprise solution, and I was really impressed by the quality of the audio and the quality of the video, even without the Hudley cameras, which I know do 4K video. People were just using the cameras on their laptop, and the video quality was much improved, even over what we were seeing with our previous vendor.
The second thing I think is, this is probably more with our procurement team, would be around the going through a distributor and the availability of units. For a long time, there weren't units available that we could actually ship. It was like on backlog between 2 and 4 months. And so we're just waiting there for these units to come, and the client's getting frustrated and they're thinking, what else can I do? Like, I want to test this out. I'm going to go test out other things.
Yeah, the truth is it's hard for this to be sticky, right? Because it's very easy to get in and very easy to get out.
Correct.
So it's almost like, well, we'll try one we'll keep trying legitimate ones until we either find one that fits and works, or we'll move on as needed. We just had a meeting a week ago. We're a half hour delayed because we just couldn't get everything to work. We have people from all over the country attending this thing. We're the ones hosting. It's the most embarrassing and the most troublesome occasion you can have, right? You do everything you can to test it, to start it early, to do everything right. And yet still. I feel like this is designed to flow in this direction. But I think if I had to flow this in a particular manner, you're afraid. And then I think from afraid and worrisome, it flows to angry, frustrated. Okay? Then from here, as you start to explore and investigate why you're having all these problems, you become disgusted and even more angry and frustrated. And then once you have an opportunity to get through it, you have a time for reflection once you start to be able to have a moment and opportunity to evaluate the outcomes. And that's when the sadness or disappointment really comes to play. And we talked about the self-reflection with Gil.
Someone sets up a call for anything, so there are like 15 calls a day. Frankly, none of them are productive. Maybe just one of them is productive.
If I was on the phone with her, so just hearing her voice, I have no idea if she's multitasking, like if she's watching TV and not paying attention. I think that's very important. And I've learned that from my day-to-day work here. I know, and everybody knows, that if you don't have your video camera on and it's a huge group meeting and you're not the center, you're not the one talking, you're not the one being asked questions, you're going to be doing something else.
It needs to be simple, clean, and easy to use. That's the big thing. Because like I said, you can't provide a guide, the simplest guide, the best guide, but getting people to open it, it's another thing.
My goal is always to move IT out of the way of productivity, making sure that the user is empowered to perform as efficiently as possible, making sure there is few blockers. If an issue does come up, they should be empowered to kind of solve it themselves.
So we have a young Van der Landen community with colleagues that are under 30, and we ask them to be an ambassador for this change and ask them to help colleagues that were not that keen on the change.
Once I actually started, and that word got around and an AV guy had started, I was getting messages left, right, and centre for me to just turn up to the room, just in case something goes wrong. That was the classic line, just in case something goes wrong. And it was usually a case of the screen wasn't on. So I'd turn the screen on for them, log into the machine and be like, oh, is that it? And I'd be like, yeah, that's it. But I feel like I had a big task ahead of me to get them to a point where they were confident enough to not have to message me.
We're trying to build all this like logic because we only have like 3 people to man like 300 rooms here in Santa Monica. So we have to like have them be available because we used to have them to where in the morning we literally had someone walking around every single room.
Doing a survey, checking out.
Doing a survey, doing a test, making a call, joining a call, like making sure we can share.
So we went from me being booked in almost every other day to going and just help people set up to people getting on with it. Because it was, to them, it was just a solution of just tapping on their meeting.
Right. And how did that make you feel, that change?
Yeah, relieved. Yeah, it made me feel relieved.
Why is that it's relieved?
Because I was also tasked with setting up our global offices, and I also look after all the UK mobile devices. So I've got a lot on my plate, and that step in my role took up a hell of a lot of time, especially me having to travel between 3 offices. For me, if I'm not having to help any of the colleagues with the AV, that means I've sort of done my job right. Yeah.
So now we have discussed the mindset of established and new generation. I would like to take that as a lens through which we go into the journey map of the decision makers. So we're going to walk you through the journey of the decision maker, starting at the desiring phase, up to the finding phase, then the piloting phase. We're going to go into buying, deploying, onboarding it, using it, all the way to supporting it and monitoring at the end. And it brings out the loop. When we walk you through those micro moments on the top, as you see here in the desiring and finding way, it will follow in the story to continue. The main key stakeholder is the decision maker itself, and that has the blue line in the middle. But besides that, because we want to see this picture holistically as well, we also including the end user, which is the gray line on top, and the resellers as a support function on the bottom. The moment that they will have contact when their needs meet, or there are conflicting requirements, I will highlight that down the road. On top of the other dilemmas, and those are the most important conflicting needs for the decision makers, and they will be the overarching umbrella for the pain points that are underneath. If we start with the desiring phase, we start before they actually make the decision. And with the mindset that we have from the stakeholder and requirements map, we've seen the difference between the established and the new generation company cultures. And based on these different company cultures, triggers become more apparent. For the established companies, the most common ones are expired licenses, depreciated assets, refurbishing, and the change of leadership. As we saw, that stakeholder is the most important stakeholder for them. For the new generation, on the other hand, we have the user complaint. So the more bottom-up triggers will be more apparent. And two other ones are the upgrade of the system will become a downgrade of a system. Like Chad is saying, they were using WebEx, and when they were using WebEx, they suddenly gave an upgrade. And that upgrade that deleted the functionalities that they were there, and it was such a bad experience that they said, it can't go any longer, and I'm going to change to a different system. So for them, that was the trigger to move on. And the last one that I would like to highlight is the expanding to the new office. The reason that this one is important is because during the journey, this is a receptivity moment that will change his choices down the line. Mainly because this new office brings a time constraint along where the decision maker is forced to make quick decisions down the line. So if we get the trigger down, there are some perceptions of HMH that we need to take into account too, because that will shape the choices that they will do down the journey. The most important ones are highlighted here. First of all is HMH is it gives an unreliable experience. And we will see that later on as well. If you have one bad experience with HMH, then it's ruined for everywhere. So it's really hard to change that perception later on. The second one is that Hangouts Meet Hardware is an obsolete hardware solution. Because of the perception of Hangouts and the difference between Meet, there is a misperception that it's not working anymore. We even had someone who said that Google is known for pulling the plug out of things, so that gives like an unreliability for your future roadmap. The third one is that HMH is not suitable to financial industry. We have had the opportunity to talk with a lot of company cultures that are in the financial sector. And what we found is that their requirements are a little bit different. Especially when they're on Wall Street, they have to be professional looking, and Hangouts Meet Hardware is not fitting those requirements right now. The last two I want to highlight with some extra emphasis is that HMH is not seen as an enterprise solution right now. And that is something that we will come back later on in the journey, as you will see that it's not scalable, or sometimes it's not seen as professional enough for an established company or for an enterprise solution. And the last one is that there's still some unawareness of Hangouts Meet Hardware, unfortunately. So Daniel was saying that he was looking at Zoom and BlueJeans, the ones that he was familiar with first, and he actually only considered Hangouts Meet Hardware because there was a Google representative that showed him a demo. And then we'll see it later on, he was convinced and he went for it. But in first instance, he wouldn't have considered it. So based on these stakeholders and requirements map that we had first, the mindsets that are looking in, the triggers, the drivers, and those preconceptions, it's the job of the IT visionaire, as I would like to call them, to really shape those requirements and balance those different stakeholders on importance. And that will become his IT visionary VC vision. And based on that, he goes into the finding phase. And the finding phase consists of understanding requirements, going to sources to do some research to find options, then shortlisting option, and finally ending with determining the amount of setups and the budget that you have. Now, there's a little bit of a tricky thing with the understanding the requirements, because as you've seen in the stakeholder map, there are a lot of different stakeholders that need to be taken into account, and the multiplicity doesn't make it any easier, especially if there are conflicting concerns between those stakeholders. But also, there's no codified process as there is right now. So as Marcel is saying, if you ask 5 to 10 people in the company what they want, they will tell you all different things, and it's my job to decide what they actually need and to translate those two requirements. So based on this unstable foundation of the requirements, they're translating that into a solution. And the moment that this vision that they have is aligned with the vision of the vendor, or the CEO decides to go for one, or there's a high satisfaction of G Suite, it's possible to go into a fast track. So they can actually skip the finding phase overall. And this is interesting for Google, because if you can leverage on that, the chance that they will actually go for Google will become way higher. However, especially for established company, this brings a lot of tension for the decision makers itself, because that means that they have to do a lot of change management down the road to ensure and broaden the adoption later on. As Marcel is saying from a G Suite and HMH company, in 2011, the CEO broadcasted, we want to be innovative, and if we want to be innovative and we want to be evolving, then we need to have a VC solution that goes along with us. But he said that only reached half of the company, and because he didn't kept on pushing and pushing and pushing and reinforcing that message, it kind of got lost. So at the end, he said we had to do a lot of change management and convincing the users to adopt it, but also, as it is a conglomerate, the other companies to actually adopt it and penetrate as well. The moment that you don't have those triggers for the fast track, or you don't have those drivers, the decision makers are forced to go into this finding process and compare more options than only Hangouts Meet Hardware. The biggest pain point here is that the perfect solution unfortunately does not exist for them. It's only the most suitable solution to their company to adapt and adopt to their needs, as we saw in the dilemma earlier on. Because this perfect solution does not exist and there are so many overwhelming vendors, what they do as a workaround is that they rely on resellers. They want to hear from resellers what is the best option for me, because then that shares the ownership. That goes in a conflict with the resellers though. Well, with the people that we talk to, and especially Jason, he says, I feel indifferent about it. I don't care too much, because the margin that is on Hangouts Meet Hardware is so small. It's only 2 to 3%. It's not worth my effort, especially not to support them down the road and letting them make the right decision for this. While for Microsoft, they have a way higher margin. So for them, it's way more interesting to actually push Microsoft than Hangouts Meet Hardware, or push the G Suite instead of the hardware itself. So the sources that they go to have two main functions. One is to anticipate on the journey, so it's to see later on in the journey, is it going to be a lot of work for me in maintenance, in support, and the other part is to reassure. There are so many vendors that offer the perfect solution but are missing your key function, that you need the reassurance more than support to actually help you choose and to assure your company that this is the best solution for your company needs. I'll walk you through one of the sources to anticipate is the company websites, first of all. So they see, to understand what kind of company do we have, as we saw on the stakeholder map, they're looking for, is this company video conferencing centric for an established company, or is this company focused on collaboration for the more new generation companies? But they also rely a lot on Gartner and customer reviews for that. On top of that, they have a kind of a more unconventional source that they use, which is YouTube. Because for YouTube, they're looking for engaging and up-to-date information pieces to really anticipate on what is coming down the line. So does this company understand my users? Do they understand my needs? Are they going to evolve later on? As Felix shared with us, a non-G Suite customer, but actually a Blue Jeans customer, that he liked to go to the YouTube channels of Blue Jeans because it showed that they were evolving, that they were changing, that they were adapting to the needs of their customers. And he compared that with WebEx, which is only focused on sales and not on the features. And he said, I'm not interested in the sales. I don't care about that. I want to see what I'm getting into when I go for Blue Jeans later on. Besides the sources that help them to anticipate, they also have sources to help them reassure that their choice is the right one. And the key insight is here that they are looking for sources of community, where they see like other companies that are doing the same, or they go to fairs in which they see that ex-users, even if they know that they're fake, even that are users telling about their experience, and they're Googling small SMB company with these needs. Because you want to see if it works for them, then it works for me as well. So one of the sources that I would like to highlight is the G Suite club that they have. We talked with some big companies in the Netherlands, and what they do is they connect together. They're all Hangouts Meet Hardware users, and they share with them what's going on in the roadmap, what they can expect. But also, and that is Marcel, they were one of the first, and I felt really proud about that, is other companies ask them, hey, you're using Hangouts Meet Hardware, can we please have a look and see how you're doing it, because we would like to learn from that. So that's really a word-to-mouth communication that we would like to emphasize here. The biggest workaround or biggest source here, though, is the use of a demo. And we saw that with almost all participants, that it is the first moment of truth, where they get the reassurance of the proposed option, and it really shows them the art of the possible. It shows them the perfect picture to see, understand the features, and see what is ahead of them. And it helps them even to convince the management later on and see getting the buy-in from them based on this, what it could be for us. This actually aligns a lot with the resellers as well, because the resellers, they want to sell, of course. So they would like to have a demo in a controlled environment where they can actually show off the best features without any difficulties of, are my cables long enough? Is it going to be easy to install? So it's just a nice picture to look at. So that is something for Google to make use of. So for the demo, it consists of a few activities. One is to contact the vendor. The other one is inviting the IT. So when the IT department comes to evaluate the option, and they might go to 2 or 3 different options. And after that, they choose the option and will go later on to get the buy-in from the marketing and the management. We will touch upon that later. When they contact the vendor, they have a pain point, as Felix says, that the contact forms takes way too long. So when they actually go through the sales, it takes like 5 days. And especially for new generation companies who have a constant and quick pace, those 5 days take way too long. So what they rather do is actually go to forums and find the sales representative from there and see if they can contact it directly. So that's important for Google, because that's a channel that you have to be in there if you want to reach those new generation companies. The moment that they actually go to the demo and evaluate those different options is an important moment. As I said, it's the first moment of truth. And you can actually change perceptions. Like I already mentioned earlier, that Daniel didn't even consider Hangouts Meet Hardware because he was not aware of it. This demo changed his perception, it changed his mind. He went through it and he says, it was better than I expected. Even with the Hadley camera, it was good quality, good audio. I was blown away. So I was like, yeah, sure, let's go for this, especially with the price so low. So it really changed his perception, because otherwise he would have gone for blue jeans. So after they found the solution, or they found the different options, they're going to go in shortlisting options. And it's really crucial to have a clear and transparent roadmap here, because that helps them anticipate the long-term relationship with the vendor that you might have. As Roman is saying, his desired feature was not available, and that made him angry and sad. But looking at the roadmap and seeing that it's coming down the line actually made him choose that solution and made him hopeful that it will come and his answers will be met. And after that, of course, you determine the amount of numbers based on the new information that you gathered. You determine the budget, and it ends with the video conferencing solution selected. And after that, and I will touch upon that later, it's more of a matter of getting the buy-in from your stakeholders to increase and broaden the adoption. To wrap up the desiring and defining phase, I would like to give you one of the dilemmas that we saw internally with the decision makers. On one hand, they want to find a solution that fits their vision of collaboration. As you remember, they have collected all those different preconceptions, all those different requirements, and they want to enhance that collaboration and productivity and happiness as we saw in the new generation companies. But on the other hand, they also need to make compromises on their vision to address all the preconceptions and needs from the other internal stakeholders. Like we have seen in the stakeholder map, the management in established companies are looking for familiar brands, or the budget needs to be low, or it needs to be an ambiguous system. So balancing all those different needs and ticking all those boxes, that is the main challenge here without compromising your vision. So after the demo phase and the finding, it brings us to the piloting phase. And the piloting phase is the second moment of truth, in which the decision makers get reassurance on the state of the feasible, basically. So what he's doing, he's getting approval from the power user. So this one is more important for the new generation companies in that sense. It gives reassurance on the choice, like giving the idea, did I make the right choice after I chose the video conferencing solutions? And it really helps you to evaluate the suitability in the context itself, so the state of the feasible. The piloting phase consists of a few activities. The first one is the contact for the pilot, going to setting up the room, involving the users, which is a big point that I will come back to, testing the solutions, evaluating the solutions, communicating the choice, and then finally finalizing the purchase. Before we go into this though, I would like to wrap up the demo part a little bit. So as I said already earlier, the demo is first to make the right decision, to evaluate your options, but it's also to get buy-in from the management and the C-level. As Daniel was saying, the management didn't agree with the look and feel, and he felt doomed. He said, this is not going to work out for us. So what he did is he explained some numbers. He got the buy-in from the management and the C-level people to really force the management to adopt it, basically, and to agree to this choice. But the C-level is not much easier than the management to convince. As we already discussed in the stakeholder map, the management is often familiarity driven. So they're more, especially in established companies, looking for the old companies, the old vendors as Cisco, Polycom, the more familiar ones to them. While the IT wants to convince them to go beyond that, to drive their vision and to actually facilitate the collaboration. The thing that would help to convince them, though, is to have use cases, which are in this moment really hard to find. As Poonam, someone working at a financial industry, is explaining us, is that if she would have use cases to that other companies, similar companies like hers are doing the same, she would be reassured for herself, but she could also convince the management to go beyond that familiarity and to prove that this is the best solution for their company. Based on that, they might go into the piloting phase after all. So people tested now, got buy-in from the management and from the marketing. They might also want to have them buy-in from the user itself, from the power users to be specific. So after they set up their room, they're starting to involve the users. And the biggest insight here is that for established companies, there's a need for change management at this moment. This is the moment where that actually starts. So as we've already seen in the movie, Brian was saying, at first, I got a dozen of emails saying, I don't like this, I like blue jeans, I don't want to change, in all capitals. He says, that was my job to really convince them, say, yes, change is good in this case, and will be better in the future, it's going to be all right. So one of the workarounds for the new generation, though, because they're more agile of a solution, is to actually just try and arrow those video conferencing solutions a little bit. So as Chad is saying, we tried Hangouts for a little bit, then it didn't work out. So we tried another one, Then if that doesn't work out, we're going to try another one. So it's more agile and rapid in change, which is important to notice because as you remember earlier, Hangouts Meet Hardware suits more of the new generation companies. So if you want to reach for the established companies who are more loyal to your companies, you really need to make a change here. On the user side, though, they are really glad that if they can be involved in this decision making. As decision makers want to share this ownership with the users and want to make power users feel heard to really facilitate this change management, the users are actually interested in being part of the pilot process. As Shara is saying, in a lot of companies, people don't listen to you. Especially the IT, they just force it on you and you have to deal with it. But you're the one who's using it every day, day in, day out. So I just want to make sure that my needs are heard as well. So that is an alignment in the sense that Google can make use of in the future. After they involved the users, they're going to test it themselves. And as we already seen from Felix, he said that if it doesn't fit at this moment with my single sign-in system or any other systems that I already have in place, it's not going to make it to the evaluation of the end. And how they do that evaluation is partly by their own expertise, for example, with their system that are already in place, but also asking the users. And as Hitaf is doing, he's sending surveys to the users that are most important to see, are we going in the right directions? Did I capture the requirements right when I was capturing them? And did I translate them in the right way? So actually seeing if you would still be able to change later on. So that brings us at communicating the choice. And the most important stakeholder in communicating this choice is the management, of course, because they are the biggest say. They're going to make the cut of are we going to spend on this or not. Besides the using price to convince the internal stakeholders, it also helps to have the vendor inside of those meetings in which you're going to convince them. As Xian was saying, he felt really supported when Cisco joined this meeting, and whenever there were some questions about technicalities that he couldn't answer, he felt backed up. He was there. So if he got the buy-in from the management, they're going to finalize the purchase. And what's interesting is that that is after they already made the decision, with the consequence that the budget is not taken into account at this moment. So at the moment that they're going to start thinking about deployment, am I going to outsource it, am I going to do it myself, it's always falling outside of your budget right now. So that creates a difficult tension. On one end, the decision maker wants to answer his vision and wants to make sure that all the features that he saw in the demo are actually coming out in their company as well, because it's on their shoulders, and he wants to facilitate this collaboration as good as possible. But the management already agreed to a budget, and since these expenses come as a surprise, they're more likely to say, oh, can't you do it yourself? I'm paying you for that, so shouldn't that be okay? So on one end, the decision makers would like to outsource the deployment to ensure the quality and the answering of their vision that they have. But since this is after they already got the buy-in from the management does not really agree with having this extra budget on top of what they already agreed to. So that brings a tension which has some serious consequences. If the deployment is not done right, it can actually decrease the quality and decreases the adoption later on. As Marcel is saying, he said we should improve the quality of the deployment because that's also how people experience it. If the experience is not good enough, the adoption will be lower, and we will not get what we actually were hoping to facilitate this collaboration down the line. And a bliss point of that is actually having that outsourcing it to the vendor. Poonam was really happy with Cisco doing it for them. He said, without any worry about or supervising, I could just trust them, rely on them, that they will fix it for me. And I could just do some test runs at the end, and that was it. So that really turned into a bliss for her. Unfortunately, at this moment, there's a tension with the AV integrators. As the decision maker and the management are going through a tension of do I want to outsource it or do I want to do it myself based on budget constraints, the AV integrator is trying to upsell the deployment at this moment, which is the worst time they could actually do that. And they're doing that because of the low margin that we talked about earlier. They feel like they have to gain their margin somewhere else, and I'm trying to do that at this moment. But that's increasing the tension at this moment. So this is an opportunity for Google to actually give them the incentive of the AV integrators earlier on, so they don't have to upsell it here. After they finalize the purchase, they decide if they're gonna deploy it themselves or if they're gonna outsource it. And the outsourcing will be the line underneath, and it will go into the buying phase, have more impact. It will actually speed up the process and make it more seamless for them. To wrap this up, the pilot is successful for the decision maker the moment that they got the buy-in. The buy-in from the marketing, the buy-in from the C-level, but also, especially for new generation companies, the buy-in from the power users, the one who are actually using it much. Because that will definitely determine the rest of the journey, the adoption that you're gonna have, and the experience of Hangouts Meet hardware in the future. So the biggest tension for those decision makers here is, on one end, you really want to trust on your own expertise here. You find the most suitable solution for your company because you know best. But you also need the chosen solution to drive the ownership across the company. So you need to involve the stakeholders that are most important to your company to find a suitable solution, to get the reassurance, but also to increase and broaden the adoption later on.
So the next micro moments that I would like to walk you through are buying and deploying. And buying starts from the moment they decided on the amount of units they're actually going to deploy. And the activities that we have there are placing an order with a reseller and then also scheduling the deployment. So the main insight that we uncovered in buying it was that decision makers want to have the freedom to choose the best reseller according to their company needs. And that it's something that right now for Hangouts Meet hardware, they feel restricted. And let me give you 2 examples. So what Felix told us, he's a decision maker for a non-G Suite organization. He told us that he felt resourceful when he could have the flexibility and choose the reseller that fit the best needs of his company. And that was the example with Zoom. He could go either with the vendor, but he also analyzed the other resellers within Zoom and compare and contrast what was the service that they offer and what were the choices, so he had that freedom. At the same time, this creates another insight on the side of resellers. What they have the feeling is resellers, the insight there is resellers are concerned of losing customers because there's shortage of units of Hangouts Meet hardware kits. So what Jason told us, he felt worried when selling Hangouts Meet hardware kits because there was a shortage of 2 to 4 months to actually ship it to customers. And he felt that during that time, the customers might go for another vendor and explore other options, so he might lose that deal because of that. And he put it in a really interesting way when he compared that to Microsoft, saying that there was no shortage of units with Microsoft, so that he didn't feel worried at that time, he felt at ease. This insight that I just uncovered is for the first time that you actually purchase Hangouts Meet hardware or a BDC conferencing solution. Now, the interesting part here is when they actually do the placing the reorder. So when they already deployed in one of the offices, and they want to start deploying these internationally. So the biggest insight that we uncover in placing a reorder is that Hangouts Meet hardware is not an enterprise-ready solution, which it makes it complicated to scale. And let me give you an example of what Roman told us. Roman, who is a G Suite Hangouts Meet hardware decision maker, from a company called Vopak in the Netherlands, he told us that he felt helpless because when he started to try to deploy those different units in different companies internationally, it was impossible for him to ship to all countries with one reseller. So he had to find multiple workarounds to do that. Originally, he tried to go with one reseller. He couldn't do that. They even have this workaround of shipping those units on the suitcases of some employees to ship it to those countries. And finally, he decided to use one reseller per region, so in order to be able to scale. But to try to figure out that process took him a lot of time and a lot of pain. So for example, Clement shared also the pain that he had with Google. Google was trying to push him certain resellers to him, but he decided he wanted to choose the reseller based on logistics capability. So he already had the mindset tuned for, I'm going to scale this solution. I want someone who can help me out with this. And therefore, he tried to find the best reseller for that. So buying actually finishes when they actually receive the hardware. So when they actually receive those units in their offices. And from that moment on, it starts deploying it. And here there's multiple activities that they go through. They go through planned deployment, they install the first setup, and they test the system. Now, let me walk you through the main insights that we uncover there. So in deploying, actually, they start planning there. There's a first part of a scheduling which happens earlier in buying it, but they struggle with knowing how much time is gonna be necessary from me to deploy those units. And they just do a rough estimation. In most of the cases, they actually deploy these overnight. When they actually go in planning deployment, they start having a lot of pain points there, in the sense like I have all legacy systems in those rooms, so I have to find a way how I'm gonna deploy this. And the opportunity that we've seen is when they actually move to a new office. In moving to a new office, it's also an opportunity, as Ninka said, it's a blank canvas. I can do many things there. And they rely on resellers or A/B integrators to do that. But that also creates inflicted pain points later on where I'm introducing a new VC system, a new VC solution in the office. So users might struggle in adopting that new system. So some of the workarounds that they're doing there is I'm going to deploy those units, even if it's for 2 weeks in the old context, so users can get used to it. So the learning gap is smaller, so users can easily adopt that solution. Install setup is the next activity within the journey or in the micro moment of deploying it. And we divided this in 3 buckets. Through physical deployment, which is basically focusing on connecting cables and the different components of the kits. Second one is room experience, so actually how I'm going to lay out this in the context. And the third one is digital deployment, so everything that's related to the setup and connecting this to the systems. For each of these activities, there's a main key takeaway or insight that I would like to share with you. The main insight that we uncovered in physical deployment was that Hangouts Meet hardware is not as easy to deploy as expected. And that actually creates a point because there's a lot of challenges around the kit components. What we've seen, for example, from Clement, he felt disappointed when he received the Hangouts Meet hardware kit because there were some cables that he didn't thought that he would need or they were missing. So therefore, it was really cumbersome for him to deploy those units or to set up those units. And also Daniel, who is a decision maker at Warby Parker, he also shared with us that he felt anxious because when he started putting all the components together, well, he saw there was a lot of cables there, that those were really unruly, and that also that will create certain conflicts with marketing because of the look and feel, as Ninka shared with us, that was one of the big requirements for new generation companies. The interesting part here is how, from a Cisco and High-Five perspective, these decision makers felt supported because the amount of units that you had there that you had to put together was reduced. So for example, for High-Five, the speakers and the tablet or the screen were actually all integrated in one, and the camera was separate. So it's only 2 components that you need to put together compared to Hangouts Meet hardware that you had to put 3 components. On top of that, if you think about Cisco also helps these decision makers to install and deploy those setups, so that a lot of pain is actually reduced in that process. So the key interesting thing here in physical deployment is actually an inflicted pain point for the reseller. What Brandon shared with us, who works for Promivo, he told us that when these customers are trying to renew their licenses, they found out that these customers were not renewing them. So they gave them a call and asked, hey, why are you not renewing the license? And the customer was saying, well, we never deployed, because either was too complicated for them or that they didn't have the capabilities internally to do that. So that was an inflicted pain point from their side because a lot of their revenue comes from renewals. So interestingly enough, what they did, they partnered with A/B integrators who can help these customers deploy those units later on so they can avoid those pain points. And as Ninka already mentioned before, that also creates a tension as the A/B integrators are trying to push for more products to these customers. Now, the second insight that I would like to touch upon is on the room experience. The biggest insight that we uncovered here was that there's poor deployment leads to poor BC experience because there's no guidance in that process. So as Marcel and Anders shared with us, they are two decision makers from PON. PON has multiple offices around the world. And they shared with us that they feel lost at that moment because there was no guidance from Google whatsoever in what was actually the best way to deploy those kits in terms of where should I position the camera? Is this too far? Is this too close? How big should the screen be? So they felt very lost in that process. And this pain is actually amplified when they have to rely on other people within the organization to deploy those units, because those people might not even have a vision on how it's best to be deployed. So they end up having the camera in the wrong position, the speaker mic is too far away from the person who's going to talk. So that creates a really bad BC experience, and that will affect for sure adoption later on, because end users won't be able to experience that BC solution in its full potential. So the last insight that I would like to touch upon is on the digital deployment phase. This is similar to what we've seen in scalability when they actually place a reorder, but it comes more from the digital side. So the insight here is that Hangouts Meet Hardware is not an enterprise-ready solution when it comes in terms of scalability, and that actually is hindering that part, but it's more on the digital scalability. As Terrell said, who's a decision maker at Snapchat for G Suite Hangouts Meet Hardware, he felt a bit disappointed because it's a cumbersome process to set it up, and there's a lot of manual steps to actually do that. And then he actually compared to Zoom, and he felt supported that process because with Zoom, it was quick and easy configuration. He could actually set it up with one IP address, and that was one set it up, and then everything is done. So that was really good from his perspective. Now, why is this important? Because what we've seen is this configuration also creates a lot of pain points for the resellers, where they actually have to prove domain ownership from these people. And we've seen it from big companies, from enterprise companies. This part of proving the domain ownership and being a super admin is very difficult for them because they don't know who is the domain owner, and then the reseller needs to jump in and help them with this process. And Brandon shared with us that he felt annoyed at that process because yes, I'll support my customers because it's important for the long-term relationship, but I'm putting a lot of efforts in doing those processes and those steps, and it's not bringing actually any revenue. So it's taking away from me time and resources. As we also talked about placing a reorder when you want to scale internationally, there's a really interesting activity that they go through here in deploying, which is transfer expertise. So what we realize, especially for new generation companies, when they want to deploy this internationally, is they have to rely on other people in different offices who are not IT experts or tech savvy. So they feel challenged in that aspect. As Ian was telling us, who is a decision maker at the G Suite Hangouts Meet Hardware company, Deliveroo in the UK, he was telling us that when he has to send these kits to these different offices around the world, these people in these other offices feel very scared and afraid of having to handle out these Hangouts Meet Hardware units. And actually he has a really interesting workaround. He uses the reseller itself to pre-stage those BC units and then ship it to those countries. So those people who are less tech savvy or not IT experts can easily deploy it. And that's very interesting because what we've seen is they have a lot of pain points themselves in deploying those units in the main office. And when they have to do it outside, they also hit this problem where this solution is not an enterprise-ready solution. So I need to make it easy for these people who are based in other offices. So I would like to wrap up these two micro moments with the biggest dilemma or the main dilemma that we uncover in those two phases, which you can see here on top. And it goes like this. I want to provide the best BC performance to stay true to my vision, but I also need to ensure that I'm easily scalable and ubiquitous for the whole company. So as you've seen in this process, they hit a lot of pain points that is preventing them to actually fulfill this dilemma. And they have to employ multiple workarounds themselves to actually satisfy that. So the micro moment of deployment ends when the rooms are actually set up. So the next two micro moments I would like to walk you through are onboarding and using. Onboarding starts, as I said, from the rooms are being set up, are already set up. And here we find different activities that they actually go through. They prepare onboarding material, they train IT people as well as users, and they also help users transition to the new BCC solution. And you'll see here a lot of pain points and workarounds that the established companies are trying to do. So I would like to walk you, one of the main insights that we uncover in preparing onboarding material is that Hangouts Meet hardware is not a plug-and-play solution, and decision makers need to do multiple workarounds and how-to guides to onboard these users. This is not specifically to Hangouts Meet hardware, but also to other vendors. As Matt is sharing with us, Matt is a non-G Suite decision maker, a financial research company. He shared with us that even with LifeSize, he had to change a lot of the material that was provided to him, and he felt frustrated because he said, I'm getting all this material from LifeSize, which is great, but I know my users the best, and I know it's actually going to suit them and how actually they're going to use it. And they have multiple workarounds for that. Even Clement is sharing with us, they do monthly updates on the guides to make sure that these ones stay true to the insights, and then they make it easier for the users to adopt. And even Terrell is creating these onboarding websites where end users can actually go to and find how to use that hardware and software and how to go about if they face any problems. As we've seen this successful workaround that Terrell is using to onboard users, we're also seeing other things that competitors are doing that is capturing the attraction of decision makers, and they feel like as a bliss point. And that's the case for Poonam, who felt delighted when actually Cisco came in and trained not only the users, but also the IT people there. So that really helped her in that transition of the BC solution, so moving from one to another, but also it helped her to gain credibility within the company and make the whole transition much more smooth and seamless. And more interestingly, Poonam is actually G Suite non-Hangouts Meet hardware decision maker. So having Cisco as backing her up also helped her when new issues will arise in the use of the system and how to support the end users. That was something that she could really benefit from. Now, interestingly enough, when they go about training users and IT people, we identify failed strategies and working strategies. In the failed strategies, what we've seen is the end users do not want to spend time on getting onboarded and trained. But at the same time, decision makers want to really explain the nitty-gritties of the new AB system. So that creates a tension point between both of them. On the one hand, users want to spend their time doing their job and not getting onboarded. But at the same time, decision makers really want to emphasize this is the new AB solution, this is how it works, and all the good things about this BC solution. In these field strategies, we've also seen that decision makers have these onboarding sessions where they invite the whole workforce. And Ian, who's a decision maker at Deliveroo, shared with us that he set up these training sessions for people to attend. He invited around 600 people. From that 600 people in the first session, only 2 people showed up. In the next session, he said, I just cancel it. He said that there's no need to put any effort there because they don't want to come or they think they already know. But funny enough, you'll see a lot of pain points going on later on in support. One of the working strategies that I would like to highlight, which is connected to the main insight, is projecting guidelines on the screen itself. And the insight there is that these instructions, this onboarding, should be at the user's receptivity moment and rituals. And the important part here, for example, Terrell is sharing with us, is he felt resourceful when he projected the guidelines of how to start up a call with Hangouts Meet on the screen itself. So users were much more receptive in that moment to walk them through how to do certain steps. So that opens an opportunity space for Google and Hangouts Meet to say, where do we want to play here when we onboard users? Finally, onboarding ends with helping users to transition to the new BC solution. And there is when you're going to find all this resistance from users, especially on the established companies, because of their mindset. As we've seen in the video and in the other outputs, users might have a lot of resistance in adopting this new solution, and decision makers need to put a lot of effort in change management to make sure that the end users are also aligned with the vision with their vision itself. And they use multiple workarounds there, and one of the workarounds that is most successful is they use ambassadors. They use those people who are more willing to change and they are much more aligned to be their voice in the company so they can take along with them the end users. So to wrap up onboarding, I would like to highlight the dilemma that we have on top, which is I want to make sure that my users are aware of all the details about the new BC features so they can maximize their collaboration, so I want to empower them. But I also need to provide bite-sized and relevant and quick onboarding tips to avoid disrupting their workflow. And this is where it creates this tension that we've seen before. So the opportunity is, how can we empower decision makers to provide with that information to end users, and at the same time, help the users make a quick transition to the new BC solution. So the next micro moment I would like to walk you through is using. And using is connected to supporting and monitoring. And these 3 micro moments are not divided by any milestone, because this is kind of a loop that goes all the time around and around. So as you see here, there's no milestone. And using starts with the end user perspective, whereas here they're going to start using the BC solution. So they'll plan for a BC meeting, they'll book the rooms, they'll start joining the meeting, they'll participate, and they'll end up the call. And you'll see at the same time what is actually the activities that the decision makers are doing. And you'll see here that the decision makers will see which rooms are being booked. They're also going to see that the hardware is going to be used. And then eventually they'll also participate in the meeting. So there will be also their take on what is actually BC solution doing for the company. So one of the things that we've seen in our research that was highlighted was this seamless integration between video conferencing system, in this case Hangouts Meet, with, for example, the calendar. Eric, who's a G Suite Hangouts Meet hardware decision maker, highlighted to us that this integration between the calendar, the BC solution, and the different tools they're using is really well perceived. So that's actually a bliss point on the Hangouts Meet hardware side. Interestingly enough, when they go through this process and rooms start to getting booked, I would like to highlight the main takeaway in that activity, which is when rooms are being booked, the decision makers realize that video conferencing goes beyond just being on a call or just setting up a call, but also understanding that productivity is also about the rooms that are being used. So he needs to look at this a more holistic picture. And this is the case for Anders, is a G Suite Hangouts Meet hardware decision maker at PON in the Netherlands. And he shared with us that he felt annoyed because the rooms that he tried to design the best way so we could fit the meeting intent, they were actually not used for that purpose. So for example, in this case, they had a room that was set up for collaboration purposes. And he realized that people were going there to do other types of meetings, so they will rearrange the whole room, and therefore that room was not being used anymore for that intent. So that made him feel annoyed. And also when they booked the rooms, sometimes those rooms were booked, but actually never being used. So that created also an overload of meetings and rooms being booked, but actually didn't contribute to the productivity. So these decision makers are already starting to look at different applications and platforms that they control and manage how rooms are being used for how long, so they can be more successful in making sure that the company is being productive. The second insight I would like to share with you is when end users join a video conferencing meeting. The insight here is users still perceive video conferencing as an unreliable system. So even though they know it might work, they always try to be maybe 15 minutes earlier or anticipate to that because there's this still perception that it's gonna fail. So this is an example of Chad. Chad is a G Suite non-meet decision maker. And he shared with us that he feels nervous every time that they have to set up a call because they've seen that sometimes the hardware is not reliable. And this experience comes from the experience that he had before with Hangouts Meet hardware. They are starting using it, but eventually the calls will drop, the quality was not stable, or they sometimes couldn't even join the meeting. So that created like a footprint in his mind that BC systems are not going to be reliable. And what he does is he tests the system always 15 minutes before to make sure that it's going to work. So the opportunity here is how can we change that perception of BC systems not being reliable and being actually trustworthy. Connected to this goes the insight from the decision maker side. What we've seen here, because of this inherited unreliability together with the poor deployment, is that they need to put extra effort to make sure that these systems are being adopted for two main reasons. One, users perceive this as an unreliable system, and also because they did a poor deployment at the beginning, users are also perceiving that as a problem. And let me explain you why. decision makers feel irritated, and this is the case of Anders, because end users are starting to rip out cables from the system itself because they are very much anchoring the old rituals. So they're trying to do multiple workarounds to prevent that. And one of them is to also hide the cables, for example, or go wireless. This whole process leads to the last part of using it, which is when users are participating in a meeting, some of them, I want to be in that meeting. Some others feel like I have to be in the meeting. In the part that I want to be in the meeting, what we've seen is users want to be part of those decisions. And BC is now helping them to be part of those meetings. But they also feel constrained by the features that these systems are offering. So there's sometimes a lot of inequality during those meetings. So when they join over BC, they feel that their voice might not be heard, or they cannot be as active participating in those. And that is even amplified, that pain, when they work with teams internationally, where there are cultural differences and barriers that make it more challenging for them to communicate. So these users will employ multiple workarounds to overcome those pain points. The other fact is I have to be in the meeting. And this is very interesting because as now we have technology that enables us to connect with anyone, anytime, that also creates a low threshold for meetings. So that it happens is, because I can connect anytime, I'll just set up meetings constantly. So we have more and more meetings. But those meetings are not always as productive as we thought or as we would like to. So what happens at the end is I have to be in that meeting, but actually not being productive, and I need to do other things at the same time to compensate that time. So a lot of people will multitask at the same time to prevent that. So just to wrap up this micro moment, I would like to highlight what's the main dilemma that we uncover. And is, as a user, I want to make use of the productivity benefits that BC systems bring along. But at the same time, I also need clarity around the purpose and my role in meetings to ensure I spend my time productively. So there's a big conflict there because they do definitely want to embrace the new technologies, new ways of collaborating, that it goes beyond just video conferencing. But at the same time, they also need to understand what is my purpose in those meetings. So to make sure I can maximize my time and get more things done. We also uncover a main dilemma for decision makers in the micro moment of using. But these we connected also with support. So I will touch upon this when we go through the next map. So now I would like to walk you through the last two micro moments of the decision maker's journey map. The first one is supporting, and the last one is monitoring. Supporting starts with users submitting a complaint. And decision makers get that complaint, they try to fix the issue, and eventually reach out the vendor reseller if they cannot solve that issue. I would like to highlight here two main insights that we uncovered. The first one is when they actually try to fix the issue. The main insight here is decision makers feel that they are unable to improve their vision as they have to be dealing with the day-to-day problems that users are having. So they need to support them there. And as Ian was sharing with us, he feels discouraged because he has to spend time fixing these DC issues. And eventually these issues are just going there and trying to turn on the TV because the TV was not on in the first place. Or maybe just to be there just in case something happens. So he feels very much discouraged. And at the same time, we also have Terrell's example, and that's linked to G Suite Hangouts Meet. He only has a team of 3 people, and they need to manage 300 rooms. His pain point is he had to walk into all 300 rooms set up in Snapchat to make sure that the systems were running and working, to make sure that, that no future issues were actually arising. So that takes a lot of time, and he felt very much unproductive because he could not be developing the vision and supporting the business as we've seen in the mindsets of the decision makers. The interesting part in here when they try to fix an issue is that there's a big alignment between end users and decision makers. As we see here, users take the path of least resistance to solve an issue. Sometimes they don't even want to call support because they know it's going to take too long, or they just don't want to deal with it because, well, they want to focus their efforts on something else. And at the same time, we've seen decision makers trying to accomplish that goal, giving them enough tools and resources so they don't have to be focusing on solving those issues and spend that time in adding value to the business and improving their vision. So the third insight that we uncover in supporting is when decision makers need for proficient and dependable support in a timely manner. And that's really specific, for example, for established companies, where they find it's really important to have someone who can back their backs when there's actually a problem arises. And this is the case, for example, of Poonam, who's a G Suite non-Hangouts Meet hardware. She shared with us how Cisco support is exceptional and reliable. And she felt very much supported because whenever there's an issue at 3 a.m. in the morning or whatever time it is, she can immediately call them and have that issue sorted. At the same time, we've seen other decision makers experiencing a lot of pain points because the vendor or the reseller was not fulfilling those expectations of solving decisions for them. So they want to make sure when they go for a reseller or vendor that they'll have the support that they needed as their company is growing and they have evolving needs. So they also need to see that these companies can anticipate to these issues and work together to solve them in a timely manner. Interestingly enough, when you go to the reseller side, we have here a misalignment between what decision makers want versus what resellers want. What we've seen is that decision makers demand for this 24/7 reliable support and service because their needs are changing and they need someone who can help them with that process so they can focus on other things that are more important to the business, such as adding value. But at the same time, what we've seen from resellers is that at this moment, they don't have no incentive to do that. There's no incentive for them to provide that service. So that creates a big conflicting point between both stakeholders. So the last insight wraps up the supporting micro moment. And I would like to once more highlight what is the dilemma that we uncovered in this section that is connected to also the using phase. And we've seen that decision makers want to spend time on adding value to the business by facilitating collaboration, so they want to make sure that this is happening. But they also need to spend time in ensuring adoption with minimal disruption to their users' everyday workflow. And the pain points that we've seen in these phases, or in these two micro moments, is I have to be solving issues that are taking me away of spending time in adding value to the business and thinking about collaboration. And at the same time, I'm providing all these tools to make sure that users can easily solve the issues on their own, so I don't need to be supporting them. And these tools that they need to provide, they need to fit their workflow as well. Because if not doing so, that creates a lot of resistance and users misalignment with decision makers. So the last micro moment of the decision maker's journey map is monitoring. And that's a very interesting area and micro moment, which has a lot of opportunities for Google to play. Monitoring has multiple activities, from monitoring the system to collect and analyze data from the usage of those systems. They also want to communicate what is the impact of this solution within the whole organization. They also participate in roadmap sessions with resellers, and they want to see where is this company going and how is this fitting my needs as a company. And finally, there's a trigger to decide to deploy more units, which actually connects back to what we've seen in buying it. Whereas this need, as my company is growing, is evolving, or users are adopting that system, I want to scale and I want to reorder units. In this section, there are three main insights that I would like to highlight. The first one is in monitoring system. There's a need for automated systems to track the performance of the VC solutions. Because I have so many things to do as a decision maker, I need too many things that I need to focus on. I cannot be focusing on fixing small issues and seeing whether a system is down or not and trying to solve those issues. So as Terrell shared with us previously, he said that he had their IT team walk through the 300 rooms in the whole company to make sure the systems were up and running. And that created a lot of pain for him. It felt very unproductive because they only have 3 people in the organization. So they have to walk around through all these units, and it's not the best use of their time. So Terrell, who is a very sharp guy, he tried to develop his own tools to monitor the systems to know whether that system was up or down, so he could anticipate to the problem and therefore act accordingly and use the resources that he has more efficiently. The second insight I would like to highlight is in collect and analyze data. What we've seen is that across all companies and segments, there's an urgency or a need to understand the impact of the new VC solution across the organization, to truly understand whether my vision is really contributing to the productivity of the company and having an impact. Definitely they want to measure what is the adoption of those tools. And the main insight there is that they are missing an insight on adoption and productivity. Yes, surely they're collecting data, but right now it's not helping them in really proving their point. So we've seen multiple workarounds they're using there, and I would like to highlight one from Roman. Roman is using an add-on, a plugin, additional to Hangouts Meet hardware system to get more data and insight on usage and hours spent and rooms being booked, so he can really understand whether they are making an impact on productivity or not. And that's very interesting. And he, funnily enough, he compared this to BlueJeans, was actually his previous system. And with BlueJeans, he felt informed because the dashboard itself was much more comprehensive, has much more information, and he could prove his point to management saying, yes, we made the right solution, we made the right choice, and therefore we find the right solution. Resellers also play an important role here because they also realize that it's no way to measure productivity. That it's something that decision makers are demanding for, because we need to understand beyond just using the system, how much of that time is being productive or not. So Brandon shared with us that this concern from their side, yes, there's no way to measure productivity right now, but they're starting to develop their own tools that they could sell to clients so they could have more insight on the usage of those busy systems and therefore provide them more data so they can back up their decision. These are really interesting area of opportunity for Google. As we've seen, Google can own this space of providing this data and helping decision makers shape their vision and improve constantly and optimize the systems so they can have a true impact and fulfill the vision within the organization. In this whole process, they need to communicate the impact of that solution. And right now, they're just relying on traditional KPIs, which are very well known for all of us, which is how much money am I saving on traveling, how many more calls I'm doing. But they're still missing that insight that can truly convince management that this solution is working, and it can also help them decide, yes, we need to deploy more units or not. The last insight on this monitoring phase, it is on revealing the roadmap. We've seen across the journey the importance of understanding where is this company, where is this vendor going, where are they planning for the future, so I can see whether I'm aligned with them, my vision, my company vision with the vendor's vision, so they can work together to boost the productivity and collaboration within the organization. We've seen cases as well where the roadmap was not properly communicated to decision makers. So this is the case for Claman, where the Pepsi partnership that Google pursued was not properly communicated, so there were certain aspects of that was influencing the relationship that he had with Google. And at the same time, resellers also struggle with that, because this lack of clarity on what Google is trying to accomplish and having the right material to communicate that to customers is also creating certain friction points. So resellers are creating these materials themselves to make sure they communicate that roadmap very clearly so they can foster this long-term relationship. So the insight itself here is easy to understand, which is we need to have line of sight of where is this roadmap going, so we can foster this long-term relationship and work together towards collaboration. And we've seen successful cases, for example, with Brian. He's a non-G Suite decision maker. He shared with us that with Zoom, he feels very much included. He feels included in the decision process because he's part of this customer advisory board. So there's these regular meetings that he attends that he can share his point of view on the problems that he's having with Zoom. And at the same time, Zoom can also keep him engaged in sharing with him, this is our roadmap, this is where we're going, and he also feels heard. So that was very much an opportunity for him to stay connected to the vendor, but also the roadmap. That wraps up the monitoring micro moment. Here, once more, I would like to highlight what's the overarching dilemma for this micro moment and what is the opportunity space for Google to play, which is decision makers need to have accurate performance measures to justify the value of their decision. But at the same time, they also need to measure the impact of productivity on deep collaboration for broadening the adoption. So the measures does not only need to be on time use and so, but they really want to make that connection in how is this data connecting to productivity and collaboration. So we've seen the decision maker's journey map holistically. We didn't only focus on the buying and deploying phases of buying and deploying BC hardware, but also we've seen from the moment they start designing a new solution to boost collaboration and productivity for the company, up to the moment they start supporting and monitoring that system. Throughout the journey, there's different entry points or opportunity spaces for Google to win the hearts and minds of these decision makers and have a meaningful impact on productivity and collaboration for those companies.
I'm Shanta. I'm one of the researchers in the Google Research Project. So we've heard the whole journey from designing it to monitoring it, and now we're going to move to the opportunity space for improvement for Google Hangouts Meet hardware. So during our research, we always do an activity called boundary work. And in the boundary work, we are listening, during the whole interview, we're listening for tools or other hardware pieces that the decision maker either knows about or they're using currently. And so at the end of our interview, we will actually have them rate them. So from difficult to integrate to easy to integrate was the first axis. So that has to do with integration in terms of technical integration, like hardware integration into your existing platform. So the next axis that we'll incorporate after we've had them rate from difficult to easiest to integrate is we'll add the axis of poor user experience to good user experience. And what we're doing is by comparing the different tools that these people use, we're actually finding the attributes that they find important of why they're rating things either easier to integrate or the better user experience. So this map is really only showing you the attributes that are linked to Hangouts Meet hardware, but I'll actually show another map next, which will relate all the different competitors as well. So first, we'll start at the bottom left quadrant, which is going to be the difficult to integrate, but also the poor user experience. This quadrant is characterized by inferior and inconsistent experience and fragmented hardware. And most other platforms are known for this unreliability. That's, I think, a theme that we've heard throughout this entire project. Matt, who's a non-G Suite customer, he talks about every time that he uses Hangouts Meet with another customer, he'll actually tell them, no, I refuse to use it because it's so inconsistent. He talked about how he would go from using Hangouts Meet to using his own company's platform, Lifesize, and they'd be in the same room in the same day, minutes later, and it would be a huge difference in reliability, quality, everything like that. So for him, Hangouts Meet there's no question he will never use it. And for Chad, he's a G Suite non-Hangouts Meet customer. His company uses Zoom. They actually ended up switching to Zoom because they found that the quality was so inconsistent and unreliable whenever they tried to use the Meets platform. Now we'll move up to the top left quadrant, which is going to be characterizing difficulties in deployment and a lack of a future roadmap. For Google Hangouts Meet, the two that we saw predominantly in this section were cumbersome and cluttered. So cumbersome has to do with how difficult it is to actually tie the hardware to your software system. So Joan actually already mentioned this earlier. Terrell talked about his comparison between Zoom and between Hangouts Meet. He said, for Zoom, I type in one code, quick configuration with all the hardware systems. Whereas with Google Hangouts Meet, I have to go into the admin panel. I have to do all these other things, all these other extra steps that make it just a little bit more difficult each time I need to deploy a new set of hardware. So I also mentioned cluttered. So that has to do with the integration with the system. It's just cluttered. There are too many cables. So an example of cluttered is with Daniel at Warby Parker. For him, he had to quickly deploy this hardware, but he also wanted to make sure that the users weren't messing around with the cables or anything like that because he described them as this unruly bunch of cables. And so what he did was he ended up strapping the cables underneath the table and actually attached them in and made his own little workaround. But he was actually worried that that set of cables was going to crash down one day and disrupt the whole workflow of his user's experience. So now I'll move on to the next quadrant, which is going to be, for Hangouts Meet, it's characterized by it's difficult to adopt and it's confusing to use. So one example of hard to adopt is with Thomas. He works at Verizon. They are a G Suite non-Hangouts Meet at this moment because they're still using Cisco WebEx. So one thing he noticed is that they've been on this platform for 4 months, and yet they still haven't switched over. And it's just because these older users or these people have this familiarity with the old system, and they want to keep that, and they don't see the new advantage that the new platform brings. There's also this element of confusing. So for instance, Daniel talks about how there are these cables on these tables, these HDMI cables. So the users think that, hey, there's an HDMI cable. I'm used to that meaning that I can just plug this into my computer and present to everyone. But in fact, on Google Hangouts, you have to actually join the room first and then present from there. You can't actually, when you plug the computer in locally, it's really only presenting to the local audience. And so now I've gone through the sort of negative attributes that define Google Hangouts Meet. And so if we solve these problems, this is how we can move Hangouts Meet from the top left quadrant to the ideal experience, which is going to be the good user experience and the easy integration. And so we did find these negative attributes with Hangouts Meet, but we also found positive ones as well. There are 3 attributes that define Google in the good experience and easy to integrate quadrant. One of those is integrated. So Roman just talks about how he loves that when you set up a calendar meeting or you set up a calendar invite in G Suite, you automatically get that Hangouts Meet link embedded into the calendar invite. And the other attribute is intuitive. So Daniel was talking about how though he doesn't like the cluttered mess of the Hangouts Meet hardware, he completely disregards that because of the fact that the experience is so good, the audio is so good, and it's quite intuitive. He himself said that. And then the last attribute is cost effective, actually. That makes it really easy to integrate these systems because the barrier to entry is so low. So this is only focused on the attributes that are tied to Hangouts Meet hardware. Now we're going to move into the next map, which is going to look at the broader competitor landscape and where Hangouts Meet compares to the competition.
What I'm trying to do is get people to turn their cameras on and understand how much better your meetings go whenever you have video enabled. Seeing that they're not engaged forces you to change your delivery. Seeing that they are engaged makes you feel better about the way you're communicating. And so you're able to get to the point quicker, you're able to come to decisions faster, you're saving time, you don't have to have an hour-long meeting to have a 15-minute conversation.
Our night calls are usually, with Korea. We have a remote office in Japan. When you're sharing a video of a conference call, the frame rates and stuff suck. I mean, we'll debut content and then everyone's here like, oh, that's so cool. And then, it's hard to make the other people in the offices feel excited because they don't see it all or they see like 1 out of every 10 frames. Something like that.
I think the biggest challenge is when I am on the line via Skype and the other part of the group is in one room. So when everyone is on Skype, it's like equal. And but when people are in a room and I would join via Skype, they tend to forget you a little bit faster. So you need to be more active to be part of the discussion or the conversation.
I think the fact that we were a remote, it just gives it puts up this wall where you have this security where you're sort of protected a little bit. But if you are required to be in the same room, everyone's afraid of being called out for not being prepared, for not knowing their stuff. Then if everyone has that baseline, then when they come to the meeting, then they will be much more prepared.
The Jamboard, for instance, it's kind of solution that's tied to a physical unit. So you can have it in the meeting room, but no one will use it. Because if you sit and collaborate PC to PC, you need to discuss ideas and jot down stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't have a person in the meeting room with a Jamboard. So for us, that's not an option.
I've been in IT for 15 years. One of the things that I pride myself most on is making technology disappear. technology should not be the center focus. In my house, when you walk into my house, you will never see a TV, the first thing. The TV will be behind the scenes, it will be behind a curtain, it will be in an armoire, it will not be the center focus, because all of this should be about the interactions within a room.
I don't want to feel like I have to stay right there. What if the heater's blowing? I mean, I want to be as natural. I want to be able to be myself and be able to do and animate in any way I see fit, or point to something that's relevant, like maybe a car or that tree or that, and have them feel as if they're sitting right there to see it, with feeling as if there's no boundary to the fact that they simply happen to be somewhere else utilizing some sort of technology platform. This feels like a boundary to me. This is a limitation of time and space to me. That wall with Samsung, imagine if this whole thing was just a screen. It'll feel like you're there. I felt like yesterday this guy could have been in Australia, but he was right, like I could have touched him.
So from the last map, we looked at the different attributes that the Google Hangouts Meet platform is kind of lacking, I guess you could say, and how we can move forward and move into this optimal landscape. And then the idea is that we can move into the optimized and then into the future landscape where you can be even better than the competition around you, not just emulating the attributes that the qualities that they do well, even going beyond those things. So to start off, I'll once again go into the bottom quadrant, characterized by an inferior experience, so worse than the average quality across the competition. In this case, also not cost effective. So for instance, Ion, who's a Google Hangouts Meet customer, says he was so glad that he actually didn't go with Polycom, because what ends up happening is with Polycom, there's a lot of stress financially in each of those platforms. And so he was talking about how if he had gone to his finance team and he had projected these numbers for them, he actually would have had a much, much more difficult time convincing the finance team to actually roll this out to their whole company. So he was actually really glad that he went with Hangouts Meet, because in this case, the systems were very cheap. So he talks about how he could get 5 systems for the price of 1 Polycom system. Another attribute that characterizes this quadrant is fragmented. So these different individual pieces that you need to have part of your hardware. So if you need a separate mic, you need a separate camera, you need a separate tablet in order to connect the meetings. And then I think the biggest one that we've talked about this whole project is this unreliability. Chad talks about how he has to set up his meetings 15 minutes early, even though he loves the Zoom platform. He trusts it, but not quite fully 100%. So he always feels like he needs to set it up before, and he has that stress of starting the meeting. So now we'll go into the top quadrant, which is defined, the top left quadrant, which is defined by difficulties in deploying and lack of a future VC roadmap. So for instance, I talked to you earlier about how Hangouts Meet was actually considered cumbersome and cluttered, so I won't go through those again. We talk about cultural fit, and then also lacking a future roadmap. Matt was talking about how he would never continue with the Polycom service because he felt that the company was, quote, dying off. He said if he tried to implement that solution, it wouldn't stay with him in the future. So now we'll move into the bottom right quadrant, which is going to be easy to integrate, but also a poor user experience. So this is characterized by not a cultural fit. So for instance, Poonam, she actually really enjoyed using what's called Uber conferencing system. She loved the little experience, the little things that it did, these little things that were subtly different than the competitors. Like for instance, it would actually warn her 2 minutes before a meeting instead of 15 minutes before, because she found that a lot more helpful because it's actually helping her right before the meeting was about to start. But she found that it would never fit in the company culture because it's not familiar with the people that use the everyday systems. They're used to the WebEx, and she's in the financial, the more established companies, so they're more used they want to stick with those familiar tools. We also have the characterization of confusing and hard to adopt, which I went through in the Google Hangouts Meet section. And then we also have easy to set up. We talked to Daniel, who is a Google Hangouts Meet hardware customer. They used to use High5, and even though they switched, what he really enjoyed about the system was that it was only 2 pieces. So you connect those up, and it takes a second to just connect them into the system. It's not a cumbersome process like it is for Hangouts Meet hardware. So now we'll get into the kind of ideal of the current landscape, which is going to be a good user experience combined with the easy integration. So for instance, reliable. No system is really considered reliable. Every system we had a complaint about reliability, but Zoom had quite a few more positive experiences tied with it. So for instance, Hetav, he even mentioned that he was surprised because there were lots of situations where his team was out in the field in the middle of nowhere, and it was actually able to connect for them, which he thought he didn't expect any system to be able to connect. So that was kind of a nice reliability surprise for him, which is why he rated it so highly. The other attribute that I mentioned earlier was cost effective. These systems are if they're cheaper or if they just seem like they're a good value, it's highly important to especially Hangouts Meet customers. The third attribute that characterizes this quadrant is intuitive, which I had already mentioned, and integrated, as well as compatible. One of our users, Matt, he found that the system life size was fantastic and perfect for him because he's constantly dealing with lots of different clients that have different hardware, software platforms. So what he loved about life size is no matter what their platform is, he can always connect with them. And if he sets up a meeting, he knows how he can integrate their systems into his system. So for him, the compatibility was one of the highest things. And that's actually something that we heard with a lot of people. They want to know that if they have to change systems or things change, they can change with their company's evolving needs. So as you can see, Hangouts Meet hardware is in the upper left quadrant, mainly due to its difficulty to integrate. So what we need to do is fix the attributes I mentioned earlier. We need to fix the unreliability, number 1. We definitely need to fix the cluttered and cumbersome deployment, as well as the confusing setup and the difficulty to adopt the system. So now we're going to move into the optimized landscape, which is going to be the optimized experience and the optimized integration in terms of the functionalities of today. So I'll start with integration. The 3 attributes that define the optimized integration is consolidated, so having the hardware all exist in one piece. So Daniel actually compares, he's a G Suite Hangouts Meet customer. He actually loves the fact that the Google Home is just one piece. He actually wishes that his hardware system was more like that because it's just one plug-and-play system. The next attribute is effortless. So for instance, Brian talks about how he wishes that he could go into an open collaboration space and be able to 1, 2, 3 quickly display the information that he has on his computer onto the TV without having to plug in things, so kind of this wireless integration as well. The last attribute is seamless, so technology behind the scenes. So Chad talks about how he doesn't want to ever see the technology. The technology should never be a part of the conversation. It should be facilitating the conversation and helping the collaboration in the background. So now we'll go into the 2 attributes that define the optimized experience. So lifelike and engaging. So the attribute lifelike is more tied to the technology simulating lifelike experiences. So for instance, Brian loves the idea of having a 360-degree camera because then you can see the whole room. In his mind, having the 360-degree camera allows you to simulate more of that real in-person experience. So the second attribute of the ideal experience or the optimized experience is this idea of having an engaging experience. So Felix talks about by having your camera look towards the whiteboard, you actually see the person writing there. You actually feel their body language. You feel more in the meeting than just having slides there. I would definitely have a camera looking down at the group and then another camera that faces the whiteboard. By being more involved, being more submerged in the experience, you're going to get more attention, more time spent on the problem. So he doesn't want just a camera that's going to show maybe just their face or the group, or maybe it'll be turned and it'll just show the whiteboard. He wants to be able to have both the whiteboard and the engagement, the lifelike, the emotions of those people at the same time. So now I'm going to move into sort of the future landscape or the ideal experience, as well as now, instead of integration, we're actually looking at more the ideal environment. For experience, we have customize. We had so many users talking about how they wish for their specific company, they want specific tools or specific attributes. Terrell talked about how in a meeting, why should there be the same level of participant throughout the whole meeting? There should be he wishes something more like a tiered system where you could have people observing and you could have people being the focused presenters, just adding these different layers so that you know what's expected for you in that collaborative environment. Responsive feedback loops. Google has all of this data that they can use to provide feedback to their customers. So what a lot of people were asking for was, how can I make my meetings better or my collaboration better? What customers like Roman, for example, were looking for is feedback about meetings in order to improve quality and collaborative outcomes and therefore improve ROI. Google could provide insights on call quality objectively along with usage levels and trends in order to more accurately assess performance and gauge time saved. Google could provide a service that would aid in making collaboration better and more effective. One example of this could be in the form of a tiered service where Google could supply different levels of expert advice in order to optimize performance. Within that service package, decision makers could set parameters and then receive reports on failures with solutions to fix the problem. They could benchmark their performance against industry peers, which will allow them to see how differences like network speed or number of collaborative spaces actually affects performance. So the third attribute in the future landscape of experience is going to be proactive customer service. So how can we go beyond just troubleshooting with the customers? So Roman once again asks, it would be helpful if I were to get a report from Google saying your location doesn't perform well, doesn't have the necessary ports open, or something on the network that slows down your traffic. That would help me channel back to the network team and help me improve the service for everyone. So the last attribute is best-in-class experience. So we've seen that with a lot of respondents, they want to try to imitate the lifelike experience as much as they can, but we're trying to see, is there a way that the VC experience can be actually better than an in-person experience? So for instance, Eirik talked about how it was very helpful for him to actually be in a video conferencing meeting because he was actually able to take off his headset and focus on the problem rather than be distracted by all the noise of the different stakeholders inputting all of their different ideas. And so in this way, a video conference was actually better because he was able to tune out some of the noise, extra noise. We had another example of software engineers troubleshooting a problem. And what was happening is they had this whole meeting set up, and the key people were staying in the meeting as they needed to, but they would actually drop off the call, and then new people would come in as they were solving this problem. And in a real meeting situation, it's not as easy to walk out of the room, come back in, and cause this disruption. But in a video conference, it's much more seamless. It's much less disruptive. So the final section is revolving around this kind of even future projection of removing these boundaries from a collaboration like environment. So for instance, the two attributes we came up with here were context-centric and on-demand, meaning that the environment will change based off the needs of your team or your company, etc. And we actually met with Gary, who's a member of the Google AV team, and he actually echoed these kind of same sentiments. He actually really liked WeWork, for example, because WeWork is able to ask you what you need and provide based off those needs rather than give you preset structures of, oh, here's a conference room of 4 people, 8 people. So the second attribute is flexibility without boundaries. Currently, when you want to set up a meeting, you have to find a meeting room. You may need to install hardware that can take days or weeks in order to implement. The idea with this attribute is all those barriers should go away. It should take you 10 minutes, no matter where you are, to set up a meeting that fits within the requirements that you have, regardless of space or needs at that time. And this, we find, is an area that Google can explore in order to move to the future of collaboration. So as we've seen through this map, there are attributes, qualities that Google Hangouts Meet hardware can improve on in order to get into the right quadrant. But we also feel that Hangouts has the capability to move into this future landscape of context-centric and on-demand, as well as flexibility without boundaries.
I'm Epan George, the founder and CEO of Round Feather. It was delightful to work with Google team on 2 counts. One, the research team really brought in a lot of rigor and also tremendous participation coming into the immersions with us so that they get the first-hand experience. When we did the midterm share out, the leadership brought in a lot of thought leadership, and also it was heartening to see how some of these ideas which we're bringing in, Google is already going to address with their future innovation roadmap. And I truly believe that Google is positioned to be the leader in this space by providing the user with the best-in-class experience for collaboration, along with the ideal environment. When you layer these competencies, Google will really be the leader in the space of collaboration beyond VC conferencing.